The wind comes first, not as sound, but as force. A physical wall of air rolling down from the Hindu Kush, carrying the kind of cold that turns exposed skin gray in minutes. 25 degrees below zero. The landscape offers nothing. No trees, no caves, no shelter. Just frozen earth and a sky the color of iron. And yet, there is life here. A family of 6 sits inside a structure that looks like it shouldn't work. Black fabric stretched over wooden poles, low to the ground. The material appears coarse, loosely woven. You can see gaps in the weave when the sun hits it right. It looks like the wind should tear straight through it. The cold should pour in like water, but it doesn't. For over 1,000 years, Afghan nomads survived winters in these tents. They raised children, maintained herds of animals, lived entire lives in a space that modern logic says should be a death trap. The tent is called a kirga. It's made from goat hair, and it's one of the most sophisticated, cold-weather shelters ever developed by human beings. This isn't about suffering through the winter. It's about a solution so perfectly adapted to its environment that it makes modern insulated fabrics look clumsy by comparison. The Hindu Kush Mountains cut across Afghanistan like a spine of stone. At elevation, winter isn't a season, it's a siege. Temperatures drop to -20 degrees Celsius, -25 degrees Celsius, sometimes lower. Katabatic winds, cold air draining down from the peaks, accelerate across the plateaus with nothing to slow them. These winds don't gust and fade. They blow for days. Snow comes in horizontal sheets. The landscape is utterly exposed. This is where the Kuchi people lived. Not in permanent structures, not in fortified villages, in tents. The word Kuchi comes from the verb to move, and movement defined everything about their existence. They were pastoral nomads, herders of sheep and goats, following grass and water across a territory that shifted with the seasons. Their entire material culture had to be portable, durable, and functional in extremes. The tent was the foundation of that culture. From a distance, a kirga looks almost primitive. It sits low, barely higher than a standing person at its peak. The fabric is dark, sometimes black, sometimes deep brown, and hangs in loose folds. The structure is held up by wooden poles and tensioned with ropes staked into the ground. There's no floor, no insulation visible from the outside, no chimney. It looks inadequate. But that's the mistake of someone who doesn't understand what they're seeing. The Kuchi survived the winter because every element of their system, material, design, placement, behavior, came from accumulated knowledge refined over centuries. The tent was a tool, calibrated to the exact conditions of the environment it had to resist. The question isn't whether the tent worked. It did. The question is how. Consider the material. Goat hair, not woven cotton, not canvas, not leather. Goat hair, taken from the coarse outer coat of the animal, spun into yarn and woven on horizontal looms by the women of the family. The fabric that results is thick, heavy, and rough to the touch. It has a smell. Earthy, slightly. Acidic, like the animals it came from. Goat hair has properties that no synthetic fabric has fully replicated. When water touches the fibers, rain, snow, moisture from the air, they swell. The individual strands expand, and as they do, they press against each other, closing the gaps in the weave. A tent that looks porous when dry becomes nearly waterproof when wet. The fabric tightens under moisture. It seals itself. When the weather dries, the fibers contract. The weave opens slightly, allowing air to circulate, preventing condensation from building up inside. The tent breathes. It adjusts to conditions without any input from the people inside. The material reacts. The goat hair itself is only the beginning. Wind resistance in fabric isn't just about thickness. A heavy canvas tarp blocks wind, but it also catches it, acts like a sail, pulls against its anchors, tears free or collapses eventually. The kirga does something else. The weave is coarse and loose enough that some air passes through, but not enough to create the kind of draft that strips heat from a body. The fabric flexes under pressure. When wind hits the tent, the material gives slightly, absorbing the force instead of resisting it rigidly. The structure can withstand sustained wind speeds that would shred modern camping tents. There's also the matter of color. The black surface of the tent isn't aesthetic, it's functional. At high altitude, even in winter, solar radiation is intense. The thin atmosphere filters less UV light. On a clear day, the sun's energy is significant. A black surface absorbs that energy with maximum efficiency. The tent's exterior heats up, sometimes dramatically. Snow that lands on the roof melts and slides off. Ice doesn't accumulate, and the heat absorbed during the day radiates inward, warming the interior long after the sun has set. Passive solar heating, implemented centuries before the term existed. Then there's the patina that develops over time. Goat hair contains lanolin, natural oils that provide initial water repellency. But the tent doesn't stay in that state. Inside, a fire burns continuously. Smoke rises, filters through the loose weave at the top, and coats the interior surface of the fabric with a fine layer of soot and tar. This accumulation isn't cleaned away. It's welcomed. The soot fills microscopic gaps in the weave, creating an additional waterproof barrier. The tent becomes darker, denser, more sealed with every season of use. A new tent is functional. An old tent, seasoned by years of smoke and weather, is superior in nearly every measurable way. The fiber's response to humidity is maybe the most elegant feature. In the dry cold of a high-altitude winter, the air holds almost no moisture. The tent's weave stays open, allowing smoke to escape and preventing the buildup of condensation inside. But when a storm moves in, when snow begins to fall and the air becomes saturated, the fibers swell, the weave tightens, and the tent transforms into a nearly impermeable shell. The same material that breathed an hour ago now sheds water like skin. No adjustment required, no intervention from the occupants. The tent regulates itself. Material science at a level of sophistication that most people associate only with modern engineering. But it was understood empirically by people who couldn't have articulated the chemistry involved. They knew it worked, they knew how to make it, and they knew that no other material available to them performed the same function. The fabric alone doesn't make survival possible. You can weave a tent from perfect material and still freeze if you set it up wrong or pick a bad spot. The Kuchi knew this. The kirga isn't just fabric stretched over poles. It's a structure built to work with the landscape. Start with the profile. The tent sits low. The peak rarely goes above 2 meters, and the walls slope out gently before curving down to the ground. That's not because they ran out of material or lacked ambition. It's aerodynamics. Wind doesn't hit a low, curved surface the way it hits a wall. Instead of slamming into resistance, it slides over and around. The shape sheds wind like a river stone sheds water. A tall tent would catch the wind. It'd act like an obstacle, creating turbulence, putting huge force on the poles and stakes. The kirga gives the wind almost nothing to push against. Fierce gusts that could flatten a rigid structure just flow over it, leaving the inside calm. placement matters as much as shape. You don't pitch a tent at random. Site selection is a skill, learned through observation and passed down. The nomads read terrain the way a sailor reads water. They look for natural windbreaks, ridges, rock outcroppings, the lee side of a hill. A tent in the open, even if perfectly built, loses heat faster than one sheltered by the land. The goal is to position the structure so the prevailing wind gets blocked or deflected before it reaches the fabric. In some places, families build low stone walls around the tent's perimeter. These walls, called kirga, don't need to be tall. Half a meter often works. They create a buffer zone, a pocket of still air that insulates the tent's base from the cutting wind at ground level. Sometimes the tent gets pitched in a shallow depression, a natural hollow in the earth. This creates a semi-subterranean effect. The floor sits below the surrounding ground, shielded from wind by the terrain itself. The earth also provides thermal mass. Frozen ground is cold, but it's stable. It doesn't swing wildly with air temperature the way the surface does. By sinking the living space even slightly into the ground, the family gains insulation from the most volatile part of the environment. The structure itself is tensioned. Ropes run from the tent's edges to stakes driven into the ground at angles. Other ropes connect the peak to anchors placed further out. The fabric gets pulled taut, but not rigid. The system is flexible. When wind strikes, the fabric moves. It ripples, shifts, absorbs the force without tearing. The ropes stretch and relax. The poles bend slightly. The whole thing functions as a dynamic system, responding to pressure instead of trying to rigidly oppose it. This flexibility matters. A rigid structure in high wind will eventually fail at its weakest point. A seam, a pole joint, a stake. But a tensioned, flexible system distributes stress across the entire framework. There's no single point of failure. The tent breathes with the wind. It moves, and in moving, it survives. The tent keeps winter out. But the tent alone doesn't make warmth. Inside, the air isn't warm the way a heated room is warm. It's survivable, breathable. In a space this small, the difference between life and death comes down to how heat gets made, how it's held, and how you stop the cold from draining it away. The fire sits in the center, not as a symbol, actually in the middle. The hearth is a shallow depression ringed with stones. Fuel is scarce up here. Wood is rare. What burns is dried dung from the animals, pressed into flat cakes and stacked near the entrance. It burns slow and hot, steady, radiant heat without much flame. There's no chimney. That's on purpose. A chimney would pull warm air up and out, sucking cold air in from outside to replace it. The tent can't afford that. So smoke rises toward the peak, where the loose weave of the goat hair fabric lets it filter through. It's slow. Smoke hangs in the air, coats everything with soot. But the heat stays. Radiant heat matters more than hot air. In extreme cold, warming the air doesn't work well. Air doesn't hold heat, and in a structure that breathes, warmed air escapes. Radiant heat moves differently. It travels as infrared, warming objects and bodies directly without heating the air around them. The fire doesn't warm the tent, it warms the people. The stones around the hearth soak up heat during the day and release it slowly at night. The carpets, the woolen blankets, even the fabric walls, they all absorb warmth and give it back. The floor is where heat dies if you don't stop it. Frozen ground is a heat sink. It pulls warmth from a body faster than wind, faster than cold air. A person lying directly on frozen earth will lose core temperature in minutes, even inside a tent. The nomads knew this. The floor of the kirga isn't bare ground, it's layered. First comes brush or dry grasses, laid flat to insulate and keep ground moisture from seeping up. On top of that, thick felted rugs, nomad. Felt is wool fibers compressed together without weaving, full of tiny trapped air pockets. It's one of the best natural insulators there is. The felt layer is dense, sometimes several centimeters thick. It creates a thermal break between the frozen earth and the living space above. On top of the felt, woven carpets. They're not decorative. They add insulation, another barrier. But they also give the family a surface where life can happen, where food can be prepared, where children can sit, where people can sleep without touching the cold below. At night, the family doesn't spread out. There are no rooms, no dividers. Everyone gathers near the fire, on the layered rugs, under piles of wool blankets and sheepskin quilts. Bodies pressed close. Shared body heat is heat that doesn't get lost. A person sleeping alone in sub-zero temperatures will struggle to stay warm. 6 people sleeping together create a pocket of retained heat that makes the difference between sleep and hypothermia. Clothing works the same way. Layers of wool and leather trap air, insulating the body as it moves. Wool stays warm even when it's damp, critical in a place where sweat and melted snow are constant problems. Nothing is single layer. Everything is stacked, redundant. If one layer gets wet, the others compensate. The tent doesn't provide warmth. It provides the conditions where warmth can be made and held. The fabric blocks wind. The fire creates radiant heat. The layered floor stops heat from draining into the ground. The bedding and clothing trap the body's own heat. And the family's knowledge, when to feed the fire, how to let smoke out without losing warmth, where to place bodies for maximum shared heat, completes the system. Survival isn't one technology. It's all of them, used right. The tent was never meant to face the worst of winter alone. For all its sophistication, the self-sealing fabric, the low profile, the way it held heat from a fire, the kirga was always part of a larger strategy. The most critical survival decision the Kuchi made each year wasn't how to build their shelter. It was when to move it. Transhumance, seasonal migration. There's a technical name for it, but the concept is older than writing. The nomads didn't stay in one place and endure the full brunt of the Afghan winter. They moved with the seasons, following a circuit refined over generations, timing their movements to stay ahead of the killing cold. Summer was spent at high altitude, where the pastures were lush and the herds could graze freely. But as autumn approached and the first storms began to sweep down from the peaks, the families packed. The tents came down. The poles were bundled. The woven panels of goat hair were folded and loaded onto animals. Everything the family owned had to be portable because mobility wasn't optional. It was survival. They descended. Not always to the valleys, but to places the landscape itself protected. Lower elevations where the wind was less savage, where fuel could be gathered, where the temperature, while still brutal, didn't reach the extremes of the high plateau. These winter camps, called kishlak, were chosen with the same care given to tent placement. Sheltered hollows, south-facing slopes that caught maximum winter sun, locations near water sources that wouldn't freeze solid. The minus 25 degrees Celsius temperatures were real. The nomads experienced them, lived through them, raised children in them. But they experienced those temperatures in the most strategic locations available, not in the most exposed. The winter wasn't avoided. it was managed, and the tent was only one part of that management. The goats provided the hair for the tent's fabric, but they also provided milk through much of the winter, turned into yogurt, and dried curds that could be stored. Their dung, dried and compressed, was the primary fuel. When a goat died, its hide became clothing, its meat became food, its bones became tools. Nothing was wasted, because waste was unaffordable. The knowledge of where to go and when to move was passed down orally, encoded in place names, in stories, in the memory of elders who had made the same journey for 60 winters. This wasn't written. It didn't need to be. The landscape itself was the text, and those who knew how to read it survived. The tent, the fire, the layered rugs, the clothing, the animals, the seasonal movement. These weren't separate solutions. They were interdependent components of a single system. Remove one element, and the entire structure weakened. The tent couldn't function without fuel. The fuel came from animals that needed grazing. Grazing required movement. Movement required a shelter that could be dismantled and rebuilt in a day. It was a circle. And the circle held, because each part reinforced the others. Modern survival gear tries to solve cold with a single piece of technology: a better insulated jacket, a more advanced tent fabric. The Kuchi had no such option. They couldn't innovate a new material or manufacture a heater. What they had was observation, accumulated over lifetimes, distilled into a system that worked not by overpowering the environment, but by fitting into it so precisely that the environment's own forces, sun, wind, terrain, could be turned to advantage. The black tent absorbed solar heat. The wind was deflected by landforms before it reached the fabric. The ground's stable temperature was harnessed by semi-subterranean placement. Even the cold itself was used. Frozen ground provided a solid floor where unfrozen ground would have been mud. This is adaptation at the highest level. Not resistance, not domination, integration, and it's disappearing. Conflict, climate change, and the pull of settled life have fractured the old migration routes. Younger generations move to cities. The knowledge of where to pitch a tent in a snowstorm, how to read the wind, when to move down from the high pastures, that knowledge lives in memory, and memory is mortal. When the last elder who spent a winter at -25 degrees Celsius in a goat hair tent dies, something irreplaceable dies with them. What remains is this. For over 1,000 years, people survived in one of the harshest environments on Earth, using materials most would consider primitive. They did it not through luck, but through a depth of environmental understanding that modern society has largely abandoned. The tent wasn't a shelter. It was a philosophy made fabric, a testament to what becomes possible when human ingenuity aligns itself not against nature, but within it.